George Saunders is here. He is widely hailed as a master of the short story. Earlier this year, he released his first novel, Lincoln in the Bardo. It was awarded the prestigious Man Booker Prize last month. In a review for the New York Times, fellow author Colson Whitehead said, Lincoln in the Bardo is a luminous feat of generosity and humanism. It is a very pleasing thing to watch a writer you have enjoyed for years reach an even higher level of achievement. So I'm pleased to have George Saunders back at this table. Welcome.
Nice to be here, Charlie.
So tell me about winning the Booker Prize. You don't know when you go to the dinner, as you just informed me.
No, and I have been getting the message that it wasn't going to happen and I shouldn't get my hopes up. So that it was...
Because last year was the first time an American had ever won.
That's right. Yeah, Paul Beatty, great writer.
Right.
Yeah, so it was nice. I actually wasn't too nervous to eat my dinner, and I was just kind of focused on, applauding when someone else won. So it was a really nice night, very, surprising and wonderful.
And did you have to give a speech, or did you?
I did, and being a good Southside Catholic, I had it prepared just in case. So, yeah, I didn't know.
What did you tell them?
Well, I talked a little bit about the historical moment that we're in, and that the inclination in times of difficulty is to kind of demonize the other, but in fact the other, there isn't any such thing. It's the other, if you look closely at it, if you look at it in a literary way, the other is just us on a different day. And then I quoted the great writer Tilly Olson, who has a beautiful short story called I Stand Here Ironing, in which she says of her daughter, the character's daughter, that she hopes that the daughter will just understand that she's not helpless like this dress under the iron. And I said that's one of the things that we, those of us who are concerned about the historical moment, can maybe reassure ourselves with the idea that we're not helpless and we're not alone, and that through literature and through intellectual engagement we can actually hold each other up in a difficult time, regardless of your political inclination. Literature is a force for communication and compassion, and at a time like this is maybe when we need it the most.
Lead it to have as much compassion as we have in difficult circumstances, or to give support to others who we feel may, be in the same place we are.
I think both. I think especially the latter, the people who are being maybe crushed a little bit underfoot with this new right-wing movement. I think those of us who aren't in that category need to be especially attentive. But also I think even just as we make our way in the world, for me, literature has always been a way of softening borders between people, breaking down projections, kind of taking big dismissive concepts and complicating them with actual human characters. So I think any of us could use that in a world that is kind of dominated by what I would consider a fairly shallow and very pervasive mode of social media, in which you tend to think of the other person as an invisible, anonymous other who's sort of in opposition to you. Literature turns that around and says, no, actually the person you think is your enemy, regarded with enough affection, with enough time and care and love, will be seen to be very similar to you, actually. Even if they're quite different in the world, we emanate from the same root. So to me, this is a time when maybe a certain cultural tendency to minimize art or kind of treat it as a kind of indulgence is being called into question. But it's a time when we should recognize that art is actually the way people think best about the world. We think most deeply about the world when we're engaged in a work of art.
Speaking of art, you were best known for writing short stories.
Yeah.
Everybody wondered when you would write a novel.
I slipped up.
And this is an idea you've had for a while.
For over 20 years. I'd heard the story back in the 90s that Lincoln had entered his son's crypt and held the body.
His son who had died while he was in the White House.
Willie, yeah. Willie was 11 or 12. It was his favorite son, and he died of typhoid pretty quickly. So I heard the idea back in the 90s, and I thought, yeah, that's a good one for somebody to write, but probably not me. I think part of an artist's job is to know your limits. And at that point, I was just carving out a little place for myself, and there was no intersection between what I could do and what this book would require. And I think over the years, I just got older, got a little bit, kind of felt like, well, I've lived as much as anybody. And in some way, just felt like those circles started to intersect a little more.
And so you said, why not?
Yeah, in fact, I said maybe even you better.
Oh, you better,
because if you have a small talent like I do and you work it, you don't want to leave anything on the table, and you don't want to get to the point that I was kind of at, where it scared me so much I almost turned away from the challenge. And then you're kind of done for the rest of your life as an artist. So there was kind of a harrowing period where I thought, this is really going to be hard and it might not work, but just in the sake of future work, you have to at least give it a try.
And you decided to do it through the vehicle of monologues?
Yeah. Yeah. I had a former student of mine wrote me a letter, not on this topic, but he just said, I think if you ever wrote a novel, it would be in the form of monologues. And when he said that, I got that most sort of coveted artistic feeling I got excited, like, oh yeah, that could be good, you know. So in a book with Lincoln, you know, in a book like this, you're trying to find a way in that isn't sort of dead on arrival. It has a little bit of potential in it, maybe even a little bit of a self-confusion. So as you're writing, the best feeling is, I'm not sure this is going to work. And this monologue form really made it kind of, to the very end, kind of a, you know, not at all a foregone conclusion that the book would work.
But you didn't, all the way to the end, you weren't sure.
Yeah,
they would hang together, or
right. I mean, I think that was one of the funny things about a novel is you really don't know because it doesn't go out into the world until you're done. With a story, maybe you publish it along the way and you get some feedback. But and with this book too, it's a little bit. I don't know if it's really difficult. Sometimes people are saying that it is. It's certainly got a kind of a narrow entry point. The first 30 pages are kind of disorienting by design. So I wasn't sure if people would take that gamble with me, and if they would find at the end that it paid off. So that was sort of the thing I was least certain about.
And you have historical characters, Lincoln.
Yes.
And his wife.
Yes.
And his two sons.
Yep. And some other real people. Elizabeth Keckley is in the book peripherally. Yeah.
And there's a dinner at the White House.
Right. There was a famous party that the Lincolns had, and that, you know, one of the things that drew me into this in the first place was this heartbreaking idea that the Lincolns were going to have this big reception to save some money. And right before the day, Willie and his brother got sick. And a doctor said, well, we think it'll be okay. Go ahead and have the party. So they did. And then Willie got worse that night and went downhill and died a couple weeks later.
And so they were going from the party up to the...
Right. And he could probably hear the Marine Band from upstairs. And so it's just every parent's nightmare that somehow you did something that hastened your child's
You refer to the temporariness of life and love. Mm-hmm. What's that?
Well, I guess the thing that kept coming up in my mind as I wrote the book was this weird dilemma we're in, which is that we seem pretty much designed to love one another, and that we find so much meaning in it. And, you know, I know in my darkest hour, I think what matters is what I love, and, you know, so that's fine. And then you look up from that and you realize that the other unnegotiable truth of our life is that you end. I end, you end, our loved ones end. And it seems a little hard to reconcile those. And of course, this book is set on the night when Lincoln is trying to do just that. He can't deny that he loves his son, and he knows it in his body through grief, and yet life goes on, and he has to try to lead the country out of this war. And,
What's the definition of Bardo?
Well, it's a Tibetan word for transitional state. So we're in one right now. We're in the Bardo between birth and death. Right. The book is set in the one that occurs from the moment of your death to whatever it is that comes next. Yeah. So
whatever comes next.
Yeah. And then of course Lincoln himself is in kind of this Bardo of having to quickly transition out of grief and into some kind of more functional state.
Because the war, he thought the war was going to be over quickly in the beginning.
He did. I think everyone did. Yeah. And the book is set just after the Battle of Fort Donelson, which I think, from what I've read, is kind of when people went, "Oh, this is
going to be a tough go."
Thousands of dead and no clear winners, and it's going to go on for a long time.
In fact, you said about capturing the character of Lincoln. When I was writing Lincoln, it was sort of a combinatorial thing. Part me, part him. I was practicing my ideas onto his evolutionary reality while trying to mimic him, his voice, his way of thinking.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
One of the reasons I delayed is because who wants to write Lincoln? It's like, I'm going to do my Jesus novel or something. And, but then you realize, as a craftsperson, you're not really writing Lincoln. You're writing a father and a husband on a certain night in a certain graveyard, in a certain kind of weather, assuming different postures at different times of the evening. You can prepare yourself a little bit I just read all his speeches and tried to get some of his rhythm in my head so I could later discard it as needed. And then in the end, of course what you're doing is you're projecting onto him. You're saying, here's what I need Lincoln to be. Here's what I hope Lincoln was. And what I loved about writing him was, in that situation, when you say to yourself, who was Lincoln, you find yourself bringing out the best in you. In your own self-regard, the best moments you've had, the moments when you felt most loving or most generous, those are the moments that you ascribe to him. So in a way, it was a 4-year kind of party of being able to say, okay, forget all the other guys you are, George. Can you summon up Lincoln for 3 minutes a day? And
you spent a lot of time, though, being prepared to do that. You spent 5 years of heavy research, didn't you?
Yeah, I was kind of researching as I read. Well, also those 15 years before I started were kind of casually,
right.
Yeah, but I think my model is you kind of, you almost imagine you have a sort of hopper over your head and you put everything in that you can, everything about the historical period, everything about Lincoln. And then at the critical moment, when you're writing, you say, okay, I'm not going to worry about any of that. My job as a fiction writer is to make a dramatic machine. And if something true will help me, I'll use it. If something fabricated would help me, I'll use that. Yeah.
Because you're not claiming either.
That's right. Exactly right. Yeah.
How many times did he go into the crypt?
We don't know. The newspaper said on several occasions.
Right.
So one of the fun things was to say, well, was that 1? Is it 2? Is it 4? Is it 8? Is it all on the same night? Is it on successive nights? And the weird thing about fiction is that there isn't a right answer except whatever will cause the drama and the emotion to heighten is the right answer. So in this case, I thought, well, 3. It'd be 3 successive nights. But whenever I'd write the next day at the White House, it really got boring. So then, voila, it happens in one night.
Yeah. Having completed it and having received the Booker Prize, I mean, how does that make you feel? I mean, obviously good.
Yeah,
but,
good, yeah.
But I mean, like this, why didn't I do this earlier? It was a mountain I could always climb. I'm glad I did it.
I think it's more, from the time I was first writing, I noticed that if you got praise or criticism, good luck or bad luck, the best way to handle it was just to maybe, if it's good, enjoy it for about a minute. If it's bad, weep for a couple minutes.
Weep for a half minute, yeah, right.
But then kind of try to fold it into the next book. So to say, okay, whatever this is, I hope it doesn't mess me up. I hope it helps me be braver in the next one. So for this book, one of the nice things was to take a chance, both in the form and in maybe broadening the emotional range a little bit, and then have the world basically get it, or at least some of the world get it, having this steam panel get it.
Your fellow writers, I read Colson Whitehead there. I mean,
Yeah, that was huge. So this might not say much for my self-esteem, but when I get praise, it makes me think, oh, I could try something harder, So the main thing right now is it's a wonderful memory, and then note to self, try something even weirder.
Turn into reality politics. You wrote of Trump supporters. Where is all this anger coming from? It's viral, and Trump is typhoid Mary, intellectually and emotionally weakened by years of steadily degraded public discourse. We're now 2 separate ideological countries, left and right, and speaking different languages. The lines between us down. How do we get the lines back up?
Yeah, and that was a year and a half ago. Yeah. I think
hasn't gotten better.
No, it hasn't. I think there are kind of 2 things I'm thinking about now. One is don't despair.
Right.
Because you walk out on the street and people still have their manners. The world is being held together by kindness and by decency every day, pretty much. The second thing I think we have to do is take a little bit of a diagnostic look at social media. In other words, and this is not a new thought.
Diagnostically look.
Yeah, to say, well, if I go and read Toni Morrison for 4 hours, and then I watch my mind and my body afterwards, okay, then I go and get on social media for 4 hours, watch my mind and my body afterwards. 2 almost different species are working there. So if we take that and multiply it times 20 million or whatever, it's not surprising that our communication is getting a little abrupt and anxious and agitated, and that our empathy is receding. I don't know what the answer to that exactly is. I mean, I don't think the internet is going back in the box, but I think for me, I've been doing some serious thinking about my responsibilities to my own spiritual life and what immersion in this totally made-up world, and a world in which people's manners are worse, in which people feel free to appear anonymously and insult each other. I wouldn't go to a party like that, So I've been trying to.
You wouldn't go somewhere where people you didn't know would walk over to you and say you would have.
People in costumes coming up and saying the rudest thing they can think of, and then when they go home and take the mask off, they're actually not that person. A couple times I've engaged with people online who.
It's the anonymity.
I think it really is, and somehow I don't know that equation, but somehow when someone tells you you're anonymous, some urge to be very judgmental and harsh, but that's not actually the totality of who those people are. So we make a mistake if we think the virtual world is as real as the real world. It actually isn't. Now, of course, it spills over, unfortunately. But
was part of your learning experience in writing that As I remember, you wanted to diagnose Hemingway and Carver and whoever else.
Yeah.
And in a sense, figure out what they were doing, and then you figured out what I have to do is find my own doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I was an engineer, so that my first approach was, let me diagram Hemingway's sentences and see why he's having this powerful effect on me. And then after a long, comically long apprenticeship, I realized that that's not actually the way it works. You have to, it's a totally different mindset. And for me, it has to do with this idea of saying, there's a person out there reading me. She's just as smart as I am. She's just as worldly. She's just as good-hearted. Can I keep her on the line? And you do that by respecting her intelligence at every turn, which then translates into a whole lot of editing moves that one can do and a whole lot of stances one can enact to assure the person that you care about them and you respect them.
What was the theme of your commencement speech?
Kindness.
That's what I thought.
Yeah,
it was kindness.
Yeah. It was. It haunts you. You make a kindness speech. You can never rob a bank again. No, but basically it was just saying that when I look back at that point I was 50 or something, and what do I really regret? Not much in terms of mistakes or bad decisions, but I did regret the many times when I had, out of anxiety or self-protection or just mindlessness, had been unkind to somebody, and that I would stand behind that. That's something. If I could,
sure resonated though. I mean, it went viral.
It did, yeah. That was really nice. It was, and I'm still working. It's interesting because that was a quick speech for Syracuse. I wrote it in a couple days, and but it opens up. Kindness itself is a nice idea, but it's not just being sweet. I don't think that's it. It seems to be sort of a gateway virtue. If you say, I want to be kind today, then you get up and you go to the coffee.
In part, it's the absence of being cruel.
Right. Yes, but I think also, I found that like the example I like to use, you go to a coffee shop and you see that the barista's been crying. All right, I'm here to be kind. Do I try to engage her? Maybe she'd rather not. Do I be quiet? So then you think, well, actually, kindness then has a corollary to awareness. You have to be there and really watch her and see what she might need. That's a lifetime job.
Well, I think the most important thing is you had the thought.
Yes, that's right. You set your attention
and where
correctly.
her condition resonated with you. It may produce questions. It may produce a quandary as to how to reach out or if to reach out.
Right.
But you were touched.
Yes.
The emotion of another human being.
Right. And she would, at some point, she would at least notice that.
She would have
much.
noticed that, yeah.
There's another thing, too, that, I noticed this in myself. Once you say, I'm going to be kind, well, that's a kind of conceptual agenda that you have. And if that agenda overrides the actual moment, you could make a mistake. In other words, if you're so intent on doing kindness that you stop watching her intently, then you can sometimes make a mistake. And I think sometimes in our political life now, there's this big conceptual agenda that we carry around. If I only do X, I'll never be wrong. That's actually sort of inverse morality, I think.
Yeah.
The idea to be open to what's actually happening, because in that condition, a lot more data gets in. Now, when we have our ideological banners up, our liberal or conservative on our hat, I think it can have the effect of blocking out the actual data and then cause us to act less mindfully or kindly than we might.
Was there a time that you realized absurdism was really realism?
Yes, yeah. That was when it was kind of this apprenticeship moment we talked about where I looked around the world and I thought, well, what's absurd about life is that we always think we're in control and we live to have control, but the world is always schooling us in harsh ways or gentle ways that you're not in control. That's to me, that's a definition of absurd. A guy has just won a literary award,
right,
and he's walking down the steps thinking highly of himself, and he goes down. Yeah. That's comedy, it's absurdity, and it's realism. That's how we live our lives.
Who decided on the cover?
This is a wonderful designer named Chelsea Cardinal from Random House, and Andy Ward and I and Chelsea put our heads together and picked that out.
Notice how quick they got the Man Booker Prize winner.
Yeah, that was a good one.
It's always great to have you. It's so great to have you here. Thank you. Much success.
It's always such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
So when one reads Lincoln in the Bardo, one comes away with what, you hope?
What I came away with was kind of this idea that since, and this sounds depressing, but since life is full of sorrow for everybody, there's no free exit out of this life without pain. That should color the way we interact with each other. If you see a person no matter how they're behaving, their core experience in this life is sorrow, or at least a struggle with sorrow. That, I think, is, for me, is the root of Christianity, it's the root of Buddhism. The ability to see any other human being as a suffering, striving, but ultimately doomed person. Now, that sounds kind of dark, but actually, in the few times I've been able to enact it, it's lovely, because you say, oh, I don't have to be afraid of you. I don't have to oppose you in a terrible way. I can actually see that we're in the same boat here.
Does Lincoln go to the crypt because the pain is so horrible for him? He's just looking for something? Or does he go for another reason?
I think in the book, he goes there for that reason. Almost like, it's on the day that the son was buried. And I think my imagination tells me he went home and he thought, this can't be it. There's no, that little body is out there in the woods. There's no way we can be separated. So he went back to sort of close it for himself. But of course, it doesn't work. But yeah, I think that's what happened.
Thank you, George.
Thank you so much, Charlie.
Rich Saunders, the book is called Lincoln in the Bardo, Man Booker Prize winner this season. Back in a moment. Stay with us.